Daniel doubled over, clutching his stomach as waves of pain tore through him. Each breath felt sharper than the last, and every second stretched like an eternity. He tried to stay calm, tried to tell himself it would pass, but deep down, he knew something was seriously wrong. He sank to the floor, trembling and unsure of what to do next. Every passing moment made it harder to think clearly, and he realized this night would change everything, even if he survived. Daniel was 27, living in a quiet suburb in the US, a software developer by profession, known to his friends as private, intelligent, and independent. He was not someone who shared his personal life easily. In fact, he had built his entire adult identity around being perceived as male. To his coworkers, classmates, and even casual acquaintances, Daniel was Daniel, the man he presented to the world. But underneath that calm exterior, Daniel carried a secret that had changed his life in ways no one could imagine. It started hours ago as a dull ache in his lower abdomen. He brushed it off, thinking it was just stress, fatigue, or maybe something he ate. But as night fell, the ache intensified into waves of sharp, relentless pain. He doubled over, gripping his stomach and whispering to himself, "It's okay. You've got this." He was alone in the apartment. Mark, his partner, had been supportive all along, noticing small changes in Daniel's behavior. The fatigue, the subtle weight gain, the nausea that came and went. Mark had suggested consulting a doctor several times, but Daniel had brushed him off every time. "I don't want people to know," he had said quietly. "I just can't. Everyone would see me differently." Mark tried to reason with him again that night, urging him to go to the hospital. "Daniel, this isn't safe. You need help. You can't do this alone." But Daniel shook his head, staring at the floor. "I can manage. I've read. I know how to handle it at home." He had spent weeks reading online articles, forums, and guides about labor and childbirth. He had convinced himself that he could follow the instructions carefully, that he could handle this by himself. To him, the risk was worth keeping the secret. Mark stayed by his side, refusing to leave, trying to stay calm as Daniel paced back and forth, clutching his abdomen. He held Daniel's hand through each contraction, whispering encouragements. "I'm here. You're not alone. Just breathe. We'll get through this." But Daniel resisted. He didn't want a hospital, he didn't want to be seen, and he didn't want anyone to know that he was pregnant. The contractions became unbearable. Daniel's face twisted in pain, sweat soaking his shirt. He spread towels on the apartment floor, prepared water and blankets, and tried to follow every tip he had learned online. Minutes passed like hours. The pain worsened. He felt dizzy. Mark stayed close, watching helplessly as Daniel struggled, offering quiet support and trying not to panic. Then, suddenly, the bleeding started. At first, it was light. Then it grew heavier. Daniel froze, terror rising in his chest. This isn't normal," Mark whispered. "We need a hospital. Now." Daniel shook his head violently. No, I can do this. I've read about it. I can manage." But even as he spoke, he knew he was in over his head. Daniel had always known there was a risk, though he never expected it to happen. Months ago, he had paused his hormone therapy for personal reasons, never imagining that his body could respond the way it did. Then, in a quiet, intimate moment with Mark, a moment filled with trust and love, the impossible happened. Daniel had conceived. At first, he couldn't believe it. He kept thinking it must be a mistake, a fluke. But the signs were undeniable. His body was changing in ways he hadn't anticipated. And immediately, a familiar wave of fear washed over him. He didn't want the world to know. Not his coworkers, not friends, not even casual acquaintances. Daniel had worked so hard to be seen as the man he was, the person he wanted everyone to believe he was. He feared judgment, misunderstanding, whispers behind his back. He worried that if anyone found out, they wouldn't see him as Daniel anymore. They'd see him as something else entirely. So he hid it. He wore baggy clothes to mask the growing changes, avoided crowded spaces, skipped medical appointments that might reveal the truth. Even simple trips to the grocery store became exercises in careful planning. Only one person knew Mark. And Mark, ever patient and steadfast, had promised to stand by him through everything. No questions, no judgment, just support. Mark had gently urged him to see a doctor early on. "We can handle this together," he had said. But Daniel had refused, convinced that he could manage on his own, that secrecy was safer than the world's opinion. Every day, He balanced hope and fear, love and anxiety, knowing that the secret he carried was growing heavier by the hour. By the time the ambulance arrived, Daniel's condition had worsened. His blood pressure had dropped, he was pale and shivering, and the bleeding was heavy. He had almost fainted several times in the taxi ride to the hospital. When he was admitted, the ER team froze for a second. The chart said male, but the patient was clearly in labor. Nurses and doctors scrambled into action. Monitors, IVs, oxygen masks. Everything was moving at a frantic pace. Mark stayed close, holding Daniel's hand through every step. "You're strong," he whispered. "We're almost there. Just a little longer." Daniel's labor was prolonged. His body was not designed to deliver naturally. The baby's position and his anatomy made it nearly impossible for a safe home delivery. Every contraction put both him and the child at extreme risk. The bleeding was alarming, the pain unbearable. Daniel was exhausted, barely able to focus through the haze of contractions and fear. He had underestimated the danger, believing that the online guides were enough. Mark's voice remained steady, holding him together. "We'll get through this. Trust me. Let the doctors handle it. It's not failure, it's survival." The doctors decided an emergency C-section was necessary. The clock was ticking. Every minute counted. Daniel, terrified, could barely speak. "Save the baby," he whispered through tears. The operating room was tense. Nurses and surgeons moved quickly, each second a fight against time. Daniel's heart raced, his breathing uneven. Mark stayed in the waiting area, pacing, praying, keeping his eyes on the monitors. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a sharp cry cut through the tense air. The baby was alive. Daniel lost a significant amount of blood, but was stabilized by the doctors. Exhausted, trembling, and still processing everything, he held his newborn in his arms, tears streaming down his face. Mark held him close, whispering comfort and love, reminding him that he was not alone. For the first time, Daniel realized that keeping the pregnancy a secret had almost cost both of their lives. The fear of judgment, the desire to appear male in the eyes of the world, had nearly turned a miracle into a tragedy. But as they looked down at their baby, something shifted. Despite the chaos, the fear, and the uncertainty, they felt an overwhelming surge of love and determination. Together, they promised that they would protect their child, no matter what. They would face the judgment of the world side by side, and they would never let anyone or anything harm their baby. In that moment, Daniel and Mark knew that they were a family, and nothing could change that. This story is shocking, but it's also a lesson. No matter your identity, fear and secrecy can turn even natural processes into dangerous emergencies. Labor is unpredictable, childbirth is risky, and no online guide, no matter how detailed, can replace trained medical professionals in a critical moment. Daniel survived. The baby survived. But it could have gone differently. And that is the truth that makes this story unforgettable. So here's the question. If you were Daniel, would you have risked everything to maintain your secret? Or would you have reached out earlier, trusting the professionals, and embraced the truth? Sometimes, keeping a secret feels safe, but in the end, it can be the most dangerous choice of all.